SCP-10, the Conflict Maker Object Class. Euclid Special Containment Procedures SCP-10 is contained within a humanoid residential simulation wing at the Crimson Hollow Laboratory, Port of Spain, Trinidad. The containment area resembles a modest home environment, with multiple rooms, living spaces, and a monitored family-style setup to reduce escalation of aggressive interpersonal behavior. Personnel interacting with SCP-10 must follow strict communication protocols to avoid unintentional escalation. All instructions must be clear, concise, and neutral in tone, avoiding sarcasm, joking, or personal opinion. Staff are reminded that any perceived slight, disagreement, or unintended implication may trigger prolonged verbal conflict, sometimes lasting hours. SCP-10's behavior is monitored by AI assistant, Alexa, which records all conversations for verbal escalation patterns. In situations where arguments persist for more than 15 minutes without resolution, security personnel, led by Agent Cairo Vale, are authorized to temporarily remove non-essential personnel from the vicinity and allow SCP-10 to calm down. SCP-10 has demonstrated extreme resistance to authority when her arguments are challenged, particularly when family-like figures or children are present. As such, containment measures include controlled social interactions and strict observation during any group activity to prevent verbal or psychological harm to others. Description: SCP-10 is a humanoid female entity, approximately 45-50 years old, with a large and imposing physique that complements her extremely aggressive and argumentative personality. SCP-10 exhibits a compulsive need to engage in conflict, particularly verbal disputes, regardless of correctness, context, or consequence. The entity frequently argues with both personnel and fellow SCP subjects, often maintaining an argument long after it has logically ended, repeating points, and escalating the intensity of her statements. SCP-10 exhibits a pronounced inability or refusal to acknowledge her own errors, even when evidence clearly contradicts her position. SCP-10 also demonstrates selective attention and judgment when observing others, particularly children. For example, if SCP-10 is engaged in a dispute with an adult and a child intervenes with information that supports the other party, SCP-10 will ignore the child entirely, stating variations of, "Children should not be in adult conversations." Despite this, if SCP-10's argument involves her children, she may redirect conflict toward them, expressing her anger physically or verbally, often admonishing them with extreme intensity for perceived interference or disrespect. The entity frequently relies on repetition and questioning to dominate interactions, asking rhetorical questions or restating points in ways that prolong discussions indefinitely. SCP-10 also exhibits a pronounced compulsion to report conflicts to a specific individual she trusts, often escalating disputes unnecessarily. Behavior patterns: SCP-10's verbal behavior is highly predictable in structure but unpredictable in content. She tends to observe a situation that triggers disagreement or perceived unfairness, engage immediately in vocal argumentation, regardless of the actual merit of her position, ignore evidence, counterarguments, or corrective feedback, often turning responses into additional points of contention, direct anger or frustration toward observers, particularly children or subordinate personnel, often stating, "If you don't know anything, just keep your mouth closed." Escalate arguments by invoking repetitive phrases, hyperbolic complaints, or personal anecdotes, deliberately drawing others into prolonged verbal conflict. The entity exhibits an exceptional memory for past disputes, recalling arguments and minor disagreements from weeks or months prior, often using them to justify new confrontations or to assert dominance in ongoing conflicts. Discovery: SCP-10 was discovered in a small local community center in Chaguanas, Trinidad, after multiple complaints were filed about repeated verbal disputes disrupting local events. Foundation agents observed the entity actively engaging in arguments with staff, volunteers, and other attendees, often ignoring facts, evidence, or reasoned appeals. Witnesses reported SCP-10 targeting specific individuals repeatedly, claiming injustice or unfair treatment, and escalating conflicts by drawing in children, family members, or bystanders. Foundation personnel determined that the entity's verbal aggression was anomalous in its persistence, intensity, and effect. As conversations with SCP-10 often left participants psychologically exhausted and emotionally stressed, even if the entity's argument lacked logical validity. Upon containment, SCP-10 reportedly remarked, "You always love to tell that one person everything. That's why this keeps happening." This statement, typical of the entity's behavior, highlights her obsessive need to involve a chosen person in all disputes, regardless of whether intervention is appropriate. Crimson Hollow Division SCP-10 is monitored and studied by the SCP Foundation Crimson Hollow Division. Founder, Dr. Alaric Hector, Director/Manager. Dr. Selene Marquez, Core Team. Dr. Selene Marquez oversees containment procedures and supervises conflict de-escalation strategies. Dr. Elias Grant studies SCP-10's psychological patterns, verbal aggression, and selective attention mechanisms. Agent Cairo Vale ensures containment wing safety and intervenes when verbal conflict escalates dangerously. Dr. Nina Alvarado observes SCP-10's interaction with children and secondary targets, documenting behavioral anomalies. Technician Ria Cruz maintains monitoring systems, logs disputes, and manages AI-assisted observation. AI assistant Alexa records conversations, analyzes escalation triggers, and alerts personnel when intervention is required. Incident 10A. During a simulated residential scenario, SCP-10 was presented with a group discussion including several personnel and one child actor. SCP-10 immediately initiated a verbal conflict over an arbitrary procedural detail, asserting that the arrangement of furniture was improper. When the child attempted to correct the perceived error, SCP-10 ignored all factual statements, responding, "Children should not be in adult conversations." The argument persisted for over 45 minutes, during which SCP-10 repeatedly rephrased complaints, interrupted others, and escalated her tone, ultimately leaving personnel physically and mentally exhausted. Incident 10B. SCP-10 was observed confronting a Foundation staff member regarding a misplacement of documents. Despite clear evidence showing proper filing, SCP-10 continued the argument, gesturing emphatically and repeating phrases such as, "But still, this shouldn't be happening. How could this happen under your watch?" Attempts to mediate with other staff members triggered further escalation, as SCP-10 asserted her authority over the discussion and refused to acknowledge interjections, stating, "If you don't know anything, just keep your mouth closed." This incident led to the implementation of strict communication protocols and AI-assisted observation in SCP-10's containment area. Final research note: Dr. Nina Alvarado wrote in SCP-10's file, SCP-10's anomaly is not physical but psychological and behavioral in nature. Her obsession with arguing, persistence in maintaining disputes, and refusal to accept correction demonstrates a form of cognitive compulsion that affects her perception of social hierarchies and interaction norms. While nonviolent, SCP-10's presence in group settings causes continuous stress, forcing personnel to adopt careful communication strategies to prevent escalation. She represents an anomaly in human interpersonal behavior to a degree that is both fascinating and challenging to manage. SCP-10 remains contained at the Crimson Hollow Laboratory, where her verbal conflicts continue to challenge staff patience and protocol, providing unique insight into prolonged argumentative behavior and its anomalous persistence.